Max, how you doing, bro?
Hey man, I'm fine.
Not bad, not bad. Merit, no, this is not scripted. Unless, of course, you think I am a fucking god and I'm able to script whilst streaming. That would make me the greatest person in the world, I think. Max, what is your question?
So my question is, what would you think about a loot system where, for example, everyone in the raid gets loot? So if you have 10 raiders, every one of them would get loot, and in combination with all friendly systems and separate gearing for other brackets or other endgame, you would still have enough to do without it being frustrating to deal with, I don't know, loot master, master looter, or personal loot where you get one item in, I don't know, 5 weeks from a certain boss.
All right, so the problem with that is if you have guaranteed loot that is going to drop from a boss, you are severely limiting the fun aspect of the loot, right? Because part of loot is, so it's a fine line. If someone gets a piece of loot way too easily, the loot has no value because, well, what does it matter? If you want evidence of this, look at people winning the lottery. People who win the lottery almost always go bankrupt a year or two later because they didn't work for that money. They don't know what that money is worth. They have no appreciation for the money whatsoever. Easy come, easy go. No one gives a shit about easy. So you kind of don't want to do 100% drop chance on loot. But then the other side of the coin is if it takes too long to get a piece of loot, the joy that you experience when getting the piece of loot isn't actually joy. It's sort of what's the word I'm looking for? It's relief. And more often than not in World of Warcraft, that is what you experience whenever you get a piece of loot. Because of how RNG focused loot is in World of Warcraft, when you get that piece of loot after 5, 6, 7 weeks, it's relief. It's that thing of fucking fine. Jesus. That took a while. And that's also fun for no one. Like, no one wants that. So the fine line is just before the player will swap from excitement to disappointment, you want to reward them with the piece of loot. This is where backup systems really come in handy. So not the fucking vault, because that again introduces RNG as another sort of relief system. When you finally get the item that you wanted from the vault, more often than not, you already got the item from the raid after weeks of fucking farming for it, or you get it so late that now you're no longer excited for the piece of loot, you're just happy that you finally don't have to keep farming it. The way I would do it for World of Warcraft is, because here's the thing, I get where you're coming from, and tell me if I'm wrong about this. You don't want to feel like going into a raid and killing 12 bosses is a waste of your time if you got no pieces of loot in that entire raid. Am I correct?
Exactly, and I also raided when we had Master Looter, and I was on both sides basically, right? I was in the loot council once, and I was on the other side receiving loot potentially. And both sides are not fun, but I know, personal loot is even worse, but I don't think master loot is the end all be all of right?
I think master loot should return for the use of guilds. So if guilds want to use master loot in their own guild runs, they should be allowed to do so. I think for everything else, personal loot should be the way. So unless you are in a guild, there is no such thing as master loot. You only have that feature as a guild. That I could be fine with. Anything else, not so much. Because in all other situations, master loot can create more problems than what it solves. The answer, though, to this is because ultimately what it boils down to is, if you're doing a boss, are you wasting your time on that boss, or are you actually there knowing that you could get something? Now, this goes a lot of different ways. I remember being a guild master of a high mythic raiding guild. Whenever we cleared a boss that people already had loot from, those would be the days where suddenly some people don't show up for the clear, right? If that's the boss that we're going to clear tonight, then suddenly someone is not there because they don't need loot from it anymore. So if you had a system like a token system where every single boss drops a number of tokens, with enough tokens you can buy a piece of loot from the raid, you make it so that every single boss in that raid has value, even if the boss has no gear for you. So even if, say for example in the first boss, you've already gotten the legs and the boots from the boss, you can get nothing else from that boss, well, the boss still drops emblems. So as long as you get the emblems, who gives a shit, right? No one cares. That's sort of what I would like to see from Blizzard, is implementing a token system that gives value to every single one of the bosses in their game. And I would love to see that system implemented into Mythic Plus. I would love to see that system built upon in PvP, because I think even in Mythic Plus, there's a number of sort of quote-unquote dead keys, more often than not because there's maybe no gear that could be accrued from those keys. But if you added some kind of currency to those keys, people would ultimately still do those keys. And you could even build in an incentivization system. So if certain keys for a week doesn't get, if you see neglected keys, you sort of up the amount of emblems or currency that someone can get from those keys to kind of get people, to incentivize people, to actually do it. I'm a huge fan of incentivization, not punishment. Because it's a game. You don't punish gamers. You want to incentivize them and reward them for doing stuff. You don't want to punish them. Now, to get to the second part of your question, which I think, if I understand it correctly, when it comes to World of Warcraft's gearing, I think I speak for most players when I say it's a mess. If you're a high-level raider, some of your best items is going to drop from Mythic Plus. Some of your best items are going to drop from the raid, and in very unique situations, you could even find that one of your best items drops from PvP. Well, no, it doesn't drop, but you have to PvP in order to get it. That hasn't been the case for a long time, but it used to happen in the past. Not so much anymore.
It happened in Shadowlands first year, right? Where the Demolog needed a health item from PvP.
More often than not, it could have happened, but more often than not, it will be PvPers that require shit from PvE content in order to be based. Now, what I would like to see, and I think what everyone would enjoy, is what if Mythic Plus had its own fucking gear? And what if raiding had its own gear? And what if you were a raider and you didn't need Mythic Plus gear? And vice versa. You have multiple systems within the game. These systems are very different, right? These systems are incredibly different. So why do you force people to do something that they might not necessarily want to do? I know a lot of people who only play World of Warcraft for Mythic Plus. They don't care about the raiding, they don't care about PvP, they just want a Mythic Plus. Why can't they? It's ultimately their game. They should be allowed to do that. Same goes for raiders, same goes for PvPers. Let people totally play the fucking game that they want to play. Don't try to get them to play your game. Just let them play. It's a game. As long as they're playing, who gives a fuck what they're playing? Why do you need raiders to go into Torghast if they don't want to? As long as they're raiding, they're fucking raiding. It's done. They're still playing your game, So stop trying to force people into weird shit, because I also think that solves a lot of the problem. It gives you more freedom to make really cool items and pieces, because now even Mythic players, Mythic raiders, not Mythic raiders, Mythic Plus players can get stuff like tier set bonuses, right? So 2 set bonuses, even 4 set bonuses on pieces of gear for dungeons, and you can cater those bonuses to dungeons specifically, so it kind of makes dungeon gear a hell of a lot more interesting. And raiders can get far more, because the gear that raiders get in the 4 pieces for raiders only affect the raid. And so you can really make interesting, cool tier set bonuses, because you know which bonuses will break the raid and which won't. Instead of having to worry, well, actually, if we give them this loot bonus or this set bonus, it could break one of our dungeons, and we don't want that to happen. Well, how about you just disable tier set bonuses from the raid within Mythic Plus. That means that you want to do the Mythic Plus, like Mythic Plus is where the gear comes from. Raid is where the raid gear comes from, and it's for those activities, and they're fine for entry level. So if you have full raid mythic gear, you'll be able to do a plus 10 mythic plus key. You won't be able to do a plus 15, because for plus 15 you want the gear from the plus 10, the plus 11, the plus 12, the plus 13 to ultimately enable you to do the plus 50. So it gives you the ability to start off in the other content, but it's never going to be the best gear from the content, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question, Max?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think the solution for this is already in the game, right? There was a time, I don't know if that's still a thing, but if you were a leather wearer,
yeah,
for example, a Moonkin, right? And you were only wearing leather armor, you would get a main stat boost, right? Mm-hmm. So you could do the same thing with Mythic Plus gear. If you had all, I think it's 16 slots with Mythic Plus gear, you would get a 5% main stat boost, and every piece you get from Mythic Plus, for example, would count towards that set.
Yeah.
And
yeah, you could absolutely do that.
Towards a tier set, right? You could have a 4, 8, 12, and 16 piece bonus.
Yeah.
For every bracket in the game, for every endgame bracket.
I think that could be perfect. That could be perfect, because it wouldn't be too big of a buff that it breaks the ability for people to get into different things, but it is enough of a buff so that people actually want to get all those pieces of gear. And I see Tim Hunt asking a question here, and Tim, I can see where your question leads to. The obvious answer there is to create new gear bags. So basically just take the system that Final Fantasy has and just put it into WoW, where you have your gear, right? But all your gear goes into its own bag. The bag is like, it has nothing to do with your general bags. Your gear is in its own bag. So that way you're not running around with literally, 16, 32, 48 pieces of gear, because maybe you're a PvP or a Raider and a Mythic Plus player, right? In this way, you have your item set. Your item set is in its own gear bag that you can run with and that you can fill up and remove and do whatever you want. But it just, it makes it cleaner, and it creates a lot more, I think, allowance for people to enjoy the game the way that they want to do it. Because, yeah, I think ultimately it's a smaller number of people that does every piece of content in the game. It's a much larger group of the player base that only does Mythic Plus or only does raiding or only does PvP. So the problem of having all those set pieces and gear pieces is going to affect a small group of the player base rather than a massive group, if that makes sense. Max, does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
All right. Happy to do so, dude. Thank you so much for the question, and have a nice day.
You too. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Peace.